Hello, and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective, the podcast with subject matter experts in marketing. So, when you reflect on your own MarTech stacks, do you know what you have? I mean, a true inventory. And do you know whether or not you're getting out of it what you basically pay in those yearly renewals? Do you have duplicates of the types of tech across disparate teams? I mean, quite simply, are you sure of everything you have, and are you taking every advantage to utilize or add the technology that will help your business grow? Jason Katz is a founder and principal for Growth Marketing Advisors, and he's a subject matter expert in marketing technology. And on this episode, we'll discuss MarTech governance, things to think about when buying MarTech, setting up a framework for accountability, the need for having someone focused on tech, and how to deal with all that change. So let's tune in to a MarTech advisor with a MarTech shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Jason, thank you so much for joining me today on A Shark's Perspective. If you would, tell us a little bit about your background and your career to date thus far.
Sure, Kenneth. A whiles back, I started off doing consulting for about 4 years, lots of innovative ideas. Then about 8 years at American Express, adding on execution to those ideas via marketing, product, and partnerships. And then 5 years in tech, where doing all that, but just going much bigger and faster with global brands like The Doors, Guitar Center, Curious George, Criteo, Shutterstock, and others. And most recently, I've been doing a few years in consulting, handling all facets of marketing infrastructure, covering marketing technology and marketing ops. And kind of, through all of that, the common thread is MarTech. I use it on client side to acquire hundreds of thousands of customers and millions of users, plus commercializing new MarTech solutions on the vendor side.
So, when companies bring you in, especially on a consulting basis through Growth Marketing Advisors, what are they typically looking to achieve? What's their big initial ask that you generally see the most?
I think, companies usually bring me in to manage all facets of marketing infrastructure, including MarTech. That's usually what they're thinking about. It's such an exciting time for MarTech with almost 10,000 solutions, addressing critical needs of marketers globally. Grateful to Cabinet M and Chief MarTech for making that number so commonly available and tracking it, of course. But consuming MarTech is very challenging. Every single person and company who approaches me is really thinking about that challenge from a few different perspectives. One, MarTech salespeople are the most sophisticated users of MarTech. Marketing and technical expertise is needed for selection, implementation, and consumption of MarTech that unlocks its full ROI. And then M&A, legacy systems, and cultural norms are increasing the level of difficulty. So there's a lot to navigate, with all my clients.
Sure. Well, this is probably the most loaded question I'm going to give you. But when you look at MarTech from a governance standpoint, do companies generally understand all of the pieces of tech that they have, with the soft whisper of saying, no, of course they don't?
Um, yeah, you
Did I
pretty
set that
much
up on
said
the
it.
tee for you? Yeah.
Yeah, you set that up perfectly. I'll do one last bit of setup before I answer it. But MarTech governance is, and I'm biased, but it's more important than ever, because effective consumption is not only so challenging, but upping the ante. On average, it's 30% of marketing's budget, according to Gartner. So recently, I published an article with Cabinet M on a 7-part framework about what MarTech governance means. And yes, you said it. Companies, they barely know what they have, let alone how to actually govern it. So it's
Mm-hmm.
actually pretty intense. The first thing is taking inventory, knowing what you have. Very, very hard. Second one, I call it turf wars, which is like deduplicating and rationalizing what you have, renegotiating with vendors, building for the future, which usually has two pieces. One is, it's liberating from lock-in, unifying your data, taking advantage of pre-built integrations via a customer data platform, making thoughtful decisions about legacy systems, thinking about ongoing management, because this is not a one-time exercise, nor is inventory is not a one-time exercise, nor are all of these activities. And then, get help. it's not easy to keep track of all of this. There probably has to be a small team who is helping with these efforts.
Sure. Well, do you, you're a thought leader in this space. Do you find it easier or more difficult to go in and evaluate this as an employee or as a consultant? I mean, and the reason I ask is my own experience and that of a lot of others that I've known who I've had a lot of conversations with people about this has shown me that brands often don't listen to their own employees, even if they come from that background. And so when you go in and you start making these kind of recommendations of how to, blow up and reorganize somebody's tech stack, the voice you have, either as an employee or a consultant, can be dramatically it can be listened to dramatically differently. So how do do you see it more or less easier to come in as a consultant to provide them that type of explanation of where they need to be versus being one of their employees?
Yeah, I think the consulting route um, is the way to go. I mean, truthfully, I think it is from any perspective, it's going to be challenging, and
Oh,
there
of
are going,
course.
and there's going to be an agenda, right? So, when you're working at the company, people have such strong relationships with their MarTech because, one, they rely on it to get their jobs done, whatever job it is that they're doing at the company, not necessarily the overall company's goal, but, they need to be successful. And they're busy. It's hard to do all of this. A lot of people, it's not a common understanding that all these activities need to take place, and people are really busy making sure all their campaigns go out the door and they get all their presentations done, let alone deal with this. So I think bringing in the consultant where it's 100% the focus to manage MarTech, and it's understood that you're not going to be dealing with all these other activities, I think is really setting up this exercise for greater success. But then you also have the question, who's engaging the consultant? Is
Mm-hmm.
it the CMO? Is it the CTO? Is it the CMTO? You really have to be aware of the kind of the project charter when you're going to be doing this MarTech governance to make sure that there's a really good charter. It's very clear, it's focused, and there's a good level of support across all these different key players. Got to have that partnership between marketing and technology, and
Sure.
really a good background for the project.
So, what are the roadblocks you run into once you get your foot in the door? I mean, those turf wars. Is it more on the marketing side? Is it more on the IT side? Who are the ones that are, say, helping or maybe even hindering rather the advancement of implementing new tech?
Um, let's see. I think it's
Answer that
everywhere.
politically correctly.
Yeah, I will do my best, Kenneth.
Okay.
You know, look, you'll find you'll find allies and resistors everywhere. Um, Again, because MarTech is used across the organization. And one of my most recent governance exercises, there were literally hundreds of pieces of software and hundreds of stakeholders who all need to be mapped in order to figure out what the future stack was going to be. And those people reside in all different departments and functions across the company. So it's really different. Every company is different. It's like people, right? Everyone's different. So I can't answer that with this is the definitive answer. It
Sure.
really varies. But I can say that there's really an ongoing dialogue. It's been going on for years about who should make MarTech decisions. Again, back to should it be the CTO, CMO, CTO, whether one should build or buy. Most recently, there was a
Exactly.
tweet. There was a tweet from someone who used to work at Greylock VC on Twitter who was talking about it. It keeps coming up, but again, I'll just go back to kind of the principle that will guide us through every one of these situations is that it's truly a joint marketing and engineering decision that requires ongoing collaboration, good old honest, productive discussion, and the most important part is probably respect throughout. And a lot's at stake. If we're going to migrate, let's say again another situation from a recent client, there were almost a dozen different pieces of marketing automation software, and there's a different person who's relying on that to do their jobs. when I'm talking to them about migrating to a single, one or two pieces of marketing automation software, and they're thinking about, oh, damn, I have to migrate, we have to migrate all the data, templates, and journeys,
Hmm.
from this software to this other software. It may set me back, all my campaigns back by 6 months. There's a lot to think about. It's hard, it's costly to take that long term, but well worth it perspective.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
For anybody going through any type of new tech or through digital transformation, just the idea of change. I mean, people get used to technologies that are implemented. They may not be the best, but they're the ones you're used to, and that can, that kind of hurdle can be, it may be necessary to change the technology, but sometimes people aren't used to the idea of just changing it just to change, even if it is an improvement. So, how do you train those teams though? I know you've been brought in to help with training. How do you train those teams to advance the data science part of their brains? Because that's a thing that you see across a lot of different teams. It's not just the CMO who always needs to be a more data driven marketer, but we've talked about this before. There's the broader scope of a team that needs to have more of a data driven technology brain.
yeah. As you're saying that, I recall a talk from a conference that we both attended. I think it was Samuel Money
Yeah.
from Campbell Soup, right, at Fuse. He spoke about the changing paradigm of MarTech from software to a capability. It's almost like, what is even being changed? The definition of what's being changed is, almost even before you're thinking about what the change is. How do you define what's changing? Then yes, of course, whether you're changing MarTech, your kids changing schools, or you're changing your home. I mean, change in general is just, um, it's a challenge in every respect. And then, to your question about, being data driven, it really is a change in mindset. But people talk about grand visions of being data driven, like the large tech companies, Fang, building, hiring the best data scientists in the world, building state of the art rules, having hundreds of rules, and having a living, breathing machine that reacts to all of your customers and knows them so well. Those are really exciting, and I think every marketing cloud has defined themselves as you know being a proponent and crucial to digital transformation. But oftentimes the most success that I have in getting people started is just using what you have. A lot of the time, companies have data, even little data, and they're not using it to its fullest extent. So I like to get that muscle moving, use what you have, right? That's the most cost effective, best ROI, and then start to refine in little pieces its collection and its activation, and really start to build out a larger roadmap that is that is that isn't daunting, that has little pieces where you can grow and realize kind of some small wins along the way. And then once you build up enough of the small wins and enough of that muscle, then you start to get to that step level growth. Um, yeah.
Well, then let's talk about what are the hurdles you run into externally. I mean, obviously, a lot of brands obviously work closely with a lot of different agencies, whether it's creative, performance, technology agencies. You've got vendors who are one SaaS software who may be on a monthly renewal or yearly renewal, and they don't want to lose that. They don't want you implementing their piece. But where do you sort of run into external pushback?
Yeah, I mean, I love that you mentioned the multi-year contracts and the salespeople pushing for renewal, because damn, they're good.
Sure, absolutely.
MarTech salespeople, they use different tactics depending on the company's life cycle, stage, brand recognition, if they're early emerging leadership position, and they are brilliant when it comes time for that renewal. And they're in Salesforce trying to hit their numbers. That's a lot to handle. I even wrote an article about this one in MarTech Advisor, about what are all those tactics that the salespeople use. And then,
Hmm.
you know, I think it's important as a MarTech buyer to be aware of all of those techniques, because only if you're aware of all those techniques, then can you be really effective in the art of negotiation, which is kind of the second piece. Because the MarTech salespeople, they are negotiating and selling brands, all the time. Their muscles are very developed in that conversation, but oftentimes brands, they have this conversation much less frequently than the vendors and are at a disadvantage because their muscles aren't as developed, which is another place where I usually come in and I'm able to provide, and help customers advocate in a pretty difficult space.
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of the third piece, which I alluded to earlier, is that consuming MarTech is really hard. In addition to the other challenges that I had mentioned, there's also selecting from what feels like a limitless number of vendors that are overlapping across the marketing technology ecosystem. Um, it's hard to make your way through all of that and find something that's going to address what you need without getting um, uh, kind of uh, getting confused or disrupted from what your original intention was.
Sure.
So yeah,
So if you're the CMO or the CEO and you want to bring in a digital consultant or a team to look at the improvements that brands need to make, what kind of results should a brand expect to achieve? What do they need to start thinking of to plan for? Because I do see incredibly, obviously, because of my own background as well, the value of bringing in a MarTech consultant to help advance that. But bringing in somebody without really, a goal is just a wish without a plan. I mean, where should they start setting their expectation level for what somebody like you can do for them?
I've had a variety of different types of conversations about this with CMOs and CTOs and other clients. You know,
But they probably always said we need help, but they don't know what that help is.
uh, yeah, that's right too. Uh, but in terms of, I think your question about how do you justify it, how do you build your business case? I think there are a few ways to go about it. Um, One, when you have almost 30% of your marketing budget dedicated to
Yeah.
Martech, you need to be watching after that really closely, right? Any healthy operating part of a business needs to be governed, right? They go through quarterly planning. They have the CFO, they're answering their numbers, providing their numbers to the CFO. CFOs and leaders are demanding that type of accountability,
Mm-hmm.
and there needs to be a framework for accountability. So that's one type of conversation I have. How do I have an accountability conversation about my Martech? The second type of conversation that I'll have is about hiring. What does an organization need to look like in terms of hiring to do modern marketing and effectively use Martech? And people are talking about data scientists, data engineers, um, product teams, marketers. What does that look like? So they want to know, what does my organization need to look like? How does it need to come together? So that's another exercise. And then there's the good old fashioned, you're talking about small wins. I want step level growth. How do I forecast what benefit I would get from Martech? And that really comes back to, what are you, independent of Martech, what are your business strategies? What are your
Mm-hmm.
objectives? And what are the problems you're trying to solve? And I think when you're deciding what the assumptions are in those CBAs and models, you're going to say, this is, I have a low, medium, and high. And what do I need to shift between those different scenarios? And that's where Martech is going to help you get that percentage point, or, a few percentage points to help you make that model. So it really needs to be in partnership with, P&L owners who are solving these problems and setting these objectives and strategies for organizations, whether it be a GM, a CMO, a CEO, in that type of planning process.
Sure. Well, for Shiggles, then let's talk about how a brand should build out for the future. Because if you've chosen a piece of technology, some sort of SaaS software, as soon as procurement and legal and IT and marketing get a contract and a price agreed upon, implemented, it's gone through legal, and you start to get the software to function to where, Johnny and Sally are soon using it, then there are 100 more technologies that are improvement. I mean, it can take massively long time to get, especially enterprise level types, SaaS platforms and CRMs and CDPs and whatever the technology is to operate and to go through that long process. Where do you start to help people position for the future? Because by the time they run through that normal process, there's always something new.
Yeah, so you give me a simple question, Kenneth, huh?
Yeah, really. I try.
um, I would, so let me take this question in two parts. One, what's the what's the process to build out this MarTech muscle? And then two, it takes so long to do that. How do you stay current? Because there's new technologies that are disrupting the ones that that you chose to adopt in the first
That's
place.
fair.
So, for the first piece, I think this is not a consultant exercise that happens in a silo. You know, this is an exercise of bringing together the right stakeholders from across the business to develop a very thoughtful plan based in business objectives that is informed by all of the techniques of modern marketing and all the software available in the MarTech landscape. So, I'll come in and I'll share all of these techniques and software pieces of software that are available in planning sessions, and we will choose together. Not we're not going to choose this independently and then train everyone on how to use it. We're going to bring in all those stakeholders who eventually are going to be the users who are trying to come up with their strategic plans, and we're going to do this together, coming up with what a thoughtful plan should be for in the future. And in the process of developing that thoughtful plan and going through product road mapping exercises of, what are the pieces we are going to build out over time, there are going to be principles that come out, not just, what software is selected and how do we build it out and which team and backlog is engineering team and backlog is going to absorb these stories. There's also going to be principles that come out of it of what we want to do. And then as we're building it out, I'm going to share software that is available that could potentially be used. And we're going to be building in flexibility early on, like I had mentioned with CDPs, where when you unify your data, which would be part of the roadmap, and you're working with integration providers, it's easier to be more flexible and consume more software. Oh, and since we're not going to take the 10% discount by signing for 2 or 3 years with one of the massive software providers, we're going to have more of that flexibility and put clauses in the contract. So we have flexibility. If there's a new vendor who comes out who completely surpasses functionality that was a key part of the decision making in the contract, we're going to, potentially even have an out clause where we can move to a new piece of software because the principles are going to be part of the operating group in the company and part of the contract and operating group with the vendor. So it's really it's one big exercise in collaboration, project management, and a really thoughtful long-term approach, which I know isn't always the most popular, but it's going to become more and more important in these times of large tech and kind of unstoppable, unrelenting disruption.
Yep. So Jason, what are the most important questions that brands need to ask themselves today? I mean, as we sort of wrap up, and you're providing thought leadership in the marketing technology space, what are the questions that brand advertisers should ask themselves about this before they leave this podcast?
I'd say there are three questions, and they don't all have to do with tech, surprisingly. The first one is, my customer experience excellent? Tech is disrupting every industry at unprecedented speed. I think brands need to be more honest with themselves than they've ever been because it could be too late before they know it. Number two, am I using all the modern marketing techniques that are effective to drive revenue? Data management is more advanced and cost efficient than ever. So brands can measure every program and personalize every experience. And then three, potentially most important, is my brand relevant and known to my target audience? None of this other stuff matters without this. And, kind of the common thread through all of this is, our brands taking a thoughtful, long-term perspective. There's a lot of pressure to hit your quarterly numbers and keep up with Wall Street expectations. I worked at a lot of public companies, and it is not pleasant if when you don't hit your numbers, and it's really pleasant when you surpass your numbers, those quarterly numbers. But you have to make some really calculated decisions in order to succeed in the long term and be successful in that longer term.
Agreed. Jason, it's that special time in the show. Are you ready for the 5 most important questions you're going to be asked today?
I don't know if I'm ready, but let's go for it, Kenneth.
All right, let's go. Marketing technology or a technical marketer?
Marketing technology.
So a New Yorker question. You run into it much in Manhattan. Uber or taxi?
Uber.
I don't know who would answer taxi. So we'll see how much you are in the MarTech or AdTech space. Madison Avenue or Silicon Valley?
Silicon Valley.
DMP or CDP?
CDP.
And the most important question you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Cornbread.
All right, so Jason, where can people find out more about you, follow your thought leadership, your cornbread recipes, your marketing advice, and more?
Well, I think you're going to have to come over because my wife is an amazing cook, and there's much better stuff in my house than cornbread. But yeah, since that's not always feasible, you can learn more about my thought leadership and me at on LinkedIn. I'm Jason K78, or on Twitter, Jason K123. And then you can learn more about my consulting venture at growthmarketingadvisors.tech. That's growthmarketingadvisors.tech.
Awesome. Jason, thank you so much for being on A Shark's Perspective today.
Thank you, Kenneth. It was a pleasure.
So there was my conversation with Jason Katz, the founder and principal for Growth Marketing Advisors, and he's a subject matter expert in marketing technology. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, as Jason said, and I quote, MarTech governance is more important than ever because effective consumption is not only so challenging, but upping the ante on average it's 30% of marketing's budget, according to Gartner. Most importantly to me is to remember that this is not a one-time exercise. This just got you started with a change in mindset to be a data-driven marketer, and it's ongoing. Second, people like me, people like Jason are change agents. We come into companies quite often as consultants or employees to fix problems they may have and then implement technology advancements for the future. But from any perspective, it's going to be challenging. As he said, people have such strong relationships with their MarTech because they rely on it to get their jobs done, and they're busy. And there are a lot of people with a lot of history and a lot of voices who have those relationships with the MarTech pieces they use. And my opinion is that you've got to bring in a consultant or an employee who is 100% focused on getting this completed. Third, in his own advice, Jason reminds us of 3 questions that brands need to ask. 1, and I quote, is my customer experience excellent? Tech is disrupting every industry at unprecedented speed. I think brands need to be more honest with themselves than they've ever been because it could be too late before they know it. 2, am I using all the marketing techniques that are effective to drive revenue? And 3, is my brand relevant and known to my target audience? Great advice. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. It's been my privilege to spend this time with you in order to discuss another one of many components that makes up marketing today. So take the time to take a solid inventory of your own MarTech knowledge. What's your legacy knowledge with what you've learned? What do you need to learn? And what can help your business grow when you join us on this and every episode of A Shark's Perspective?